from right around Australia. Before getting underway, just to run through a few house matters. Firstly, we are webcasting, and we've got photographers here, and there was a notice out the front that if you don't want to be photographed, if you could let us know that, so let Pete Darby or one of the attendants know that while we're underway. I'd like to confirm the people who are actually using the hearing loop, that the loop is operational and that you can actually hear it. Is anybody using the loop? Bonnie, I think you are. Yeah. Okay, good, thank you. I'd like to introduce the personal care assistants who are here tonight. Nada Werner, I think, here. Yep, just down the back there. Welcome and thank you. Please approach Nada if you need assistance. We've got two sign language interpreters here today, Paula Bunn and Brendan McQuiggan, who will be swapping over during the evening. Thank you very much. I'd like to point out with the toilets. Now, I actually don't know where the toilets are. Do we have a member of staff that actually knows where they are? Okay, so just behind the lift, and I believe I've seen that there's disability ones and access ones, and there's males and female toilets as well. Okay, so male at the left and the female on the right. Thank you very much. If you require a taxi after the meeting, if you could please let Pete Darby, who is down the back, just got his hand up, know, and we will arrange one for you. You should all have coloured cards, I believe. Now, these actually have a purpose. They are for voting during the meeting, as we have to count votes. Just some other matters I'd ask, because we're in the fortunate position of actually having people here that we don't know before. It's a really full meeting. So if you could please give your name if you're wanting to speak. I just ask that because we are managing some disability accommodations in the room, it's really important that one person speaks at a time so that everyone can have their say. There are some people here that use communications devices, and it's good form that we don't talk over people while they're using those devices, and we let everybody have a say. So with that, I'd now like to invite, we're very lucky to have Uncle Lester here to provide the welcome to country. Thank you, Uncle Lester.
Thank you. I hope I'm hooked up. I do the welcome to country. Can everybody hear me? Yep. The welcome to country is I welcome you all to the Gadigal lands. The Gadigal lands are the lands of the, we're on the lands of the Gadigal people, and the Gadigal people are part of the Eora Nation, which covers the major part of the city of Sydney. And we're on Gadigal land, and the Gadigal land, the Gadigal people was here when Captain Cook came, and they were here when the first settlement under Phillip came. So they've been here for about 40,000 years, and they're still here. So I welcome you all to take part, and when you walk on Gadigal land, be very respectful. The Gadigal people, and if you look around Sydney, there are quite a number of rock carvings and cave paintings and around the Sydney region, and Sydney has one of the largest rock carvings in the world. So and that's all part of the Gadigal lands. So I welcome you to partake in the meeting tonight for the Gadigal people. And I welcome you here, and welcome.
Thank you, Uncle Lester. We feel very welcome. Thank you. So I might just run through how tonight is going to run. So the format of the meeting is going to include the sort of formal parts of the meeting to start us off, followed by Graham Innes, who we are very fortunate to have with us tonight, doing an unplugged interview with us about his time as a disability rights advocate in Australia. And then we'd like to make some presentations to people who've helped people with Disabilities Australia as volunteers and as workers throughout the year at the end of the meeting. I'd like to ask your assistance this year if we could try and get the formal part of the meeting over by about 7:30 p.m. Those of you who remember last year's meeting at the Redfern Town Hall will probably remember that we were all exhausted and falling over by the end of the meeting, which went to about 9 o'clock. We've got some practical reasons for wanting to move through things fairly quickly as well, in that the webcast actually cuts off at about 8:45, and we really want people to be able to join in online. So if I'm pushing things along a bit, I'm not wanting to cut off conversation. I'm really wanting to keep the meeting open and to ensure that we have a good session with Graham.
What about the people in Western Australia? They're 2 hours behind.
3 hours. Well, I think they can tune in via the webcast. And those of them that aren't here, we've got most of the Western Australian disability advocacy community has joined the board. So yes, no, we're webcasting right around the country. The other thing to say to those people who are tuning in via the webcast is that we've got a hashtag for tonight, and that is Innes Unplugged for our session later on. I'm now being asked to read the apologies of the meeting. So we have apologies from Jan Cameron Smith, Bill McAnally, Philip Pluck, Jenny Stanzel AM, the Combined Pensioners and Superannuants Association of New South Wales, the On Kelly Vincent MLC, Gail Tang Demetrio, Annette Van Gent, our returning officer, Linda Palmer, Lyndall Hunt, Patricia Byrne, the St George Association for People with Physical Disability, Faye Druitt, Christopher Walters, Rob Hitchcock, Simone Rock, Suzanne Healy, and Robin McPherson. Can we have a mover and a seconder that we accept those apologies? Thank you very much. Seconder, Stuart. All those in favour? Against? I'll declare that carried. Now we have the list of proxies, which I believe are in my folder here. So I'm to read through the list of these. We have proxies from Lyndall Hunt, Nadee Shirakan, Brendan Pearce, Jan Daisley, but Jan's here, Irene McMinn, Daniela Saparo, Philip Pluck, Jeanette Cameron Smith, William McAnally, and Roxanne Pwda with us tonight. So, do we normally read out who the proxies are actually going to? No, I don't think so. All right, so I think we have to accept those proxies. So can I invite a mover and a seconder that the proxies for the AGM be accepted? Thanks, Susie. Seconder. Gentleman up front here. Okay, all those in favour? Against? I'll declare that carried. So, minutes of the last AGM. You should have minutes of the last AGM in your kits and materials that you got at the door tonight. I'd just like to thank and acknowledge the staff and the board members who worked to get these out on time for us. Are there any issues with the minutes? Somebody said yes. Is that a yes? If not, then I might invite a motion that we accept the minutes of the 2013 AGM as a true and accurate record of the meeting. Stuart? Thomas? Just missed out, Kevin. All those in favour? Aye. Against? I'll declare that carried. Are there any matters arising from the minutes that people want feedback on? We've kind of preempted this for you. One of the matters arising that we thought people might want to talk about was the setting up of the Constitutional Committee that we talked about at the AGM last year. I know that we wrote to you, and I think the board actually wants to say that we apologise to those on that committee who are probably wondering what on earth actually happened to it, but there is a reason. It was overtaken by a range of other priorities, but there's some important constitutional work that we need to do. So two things happened. The board's attention was drawn to some redundant clauses in the Constitution which affect the online voting measures that we introduced 2 years ago and had the potential to affect the entire elections. For this year, we've drafted up some amendments. We then got some pro bono legal advice on those. They threw up a whole other set of issues, and we decided that we really needed to focus on getting those amendments right and presented to this AGM, rather than attempting the more ambitious set of work around developing a whole new constitution. We really needed to get the 5 or 6 amendments that you've got before us that we'll be dealing with a bit later. Secondly, we've actually got an emerging set of issues around our legal entity status as an organisation that will reach some decision points in the next 12 months. We think it's likely that New South Wales Fair Trading will ask us, or even order us, to transition from being an incorporated association to a company limited by guarantee under ASIC. That's because of the size and the nature of our work. The suggested time frame for having this complete is December of next year. So that means that constitutional work is really important, but it will need to have a new shape. So the proposal would be that at the 2015 AGM next year, constitutional amendments to actually move us to that new structure would happen. I wanted to hand over to Christy Czajewski as our secretary to talk us through what being a company limited by guarantee might mean under our constitution and what it might mean for us.
Basically, PWDA, the organisation, basically being a public company limited by guarantee, would mean that PWDA as an organisation will have a separate entity, it will become a separate entity, set out of its members, and which made the members won't be liable unless they give an extra personal guarantee. For the liabilities intended to be organised. Although the board of directors will still be personally liable for we will need to investigate this and ask some questions around the proper structure.
So people got any questions about that at this stage? You're having trouble hearing? I think that the kind of flavour of it, Christy, was that at the moment, as an incorporated association, all of the members are potentially personally liable for debts as they fall due. But when you get to a point where you're sort of trading like a large business and you've got multi-million-dollar contracts, that a company structure moves you to a structure where the board becomes liable rather than all of the members being liable. But we've also got lots of questions about what being a company might mean for our membership structure. I've got questions about whether that means that we all need to become shareholders, how we'd conduct elections. There's a lot of work that would need to go into this, but we think that it is likely that Fair Trading are at some point going to say to us, look, because of the nature of the risk and the nature of the business that you're exercising, that PWD needs to move to that new structure. So we're wanting to get ahead of it, really investigate it, make sure that we work through the implications and that we bring a package to the next annual general meeting that's probably got some options. We'll do that similar to the way that we did the membership redevelopment work in 2012. There'll be a business case, there'll be options, there'll be information through e-bulletin for people. Sure. I don't think we've done that yet, but we're really only on the start of this. We've just really become aware that this is something we need to start looking at. So, David, did you have?
Well, I'm aware that there are actually things in company law that discriminate against people with disabilities in the definition of law property person and everyone being members of those things. Sorry about that. Yeah, thrust. No, I was just saying that there are issues in company law about who a fit and proper person is. People with disabilities haven't really ever tested that because no one's ever really, to my knowledge, been tested about their suitability as a person under company law. But there are issues there, I think.
Yeah, I think we'd agree. It's one of the reasons we think it needs looking at. Sorry.
Kevin Boyce speaking. Becoming a company with liabilities, could it mean that some of our philanthropic trust companies that give us money might now take a second look at us?
No.
I don't think so. We're already resistant terminally, which allows us to get donations. So I really think what will affect our ability to get donations and may even help us a little more because it shows people that we're getting better at managing our size. But I hope that we need to check it out.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I haven't really thought about this, but just sort of thinking about some of the NGOs that I know, large organisations like Uniting Care, for instance, they have parts of the organisation that are a company structure and they have other parts that are are a charitable structure and they continue to be able to get grants. So I think there's a whole range of options that we really need to look at. But we are worried about some of the same things that members are worried about in this as well. So I see a hand up the back.
Thanks for your answer.
Hello, Annie Parkinson here. Look, I just have one burning question, which is what is PWD trading in? If we're going to change to a trading company, what's the economic good that we are trading in?
What's the offer?
I just think this is quite a surprise to me.
It's a surprise to us as well. I mean, we're not proposing that we do it. We're proposing that we look into it, basically.
Yeah.
But Christy, what are we trading in?
I think we're still be charity. And we do provide services to the public. We definitely do fit into some of the government's new charitable purposes under the Charities Act. So, we need to check it out, but I don't think anything would really change that much. It would just be a bit more expensive, and I don't even think we need to limit it after the name, so it would just be changing the way we structure our organisation.
So I think the proposal is, sorry, I'll just take the comment from Margaret. Yep, thanks.
The Australian, Margaret Moxon, the Australian Seniors Computer Clubs Association, they started off as a New South Wales association under the Associations and Corporations Act, but they changed because they became Australia-wide. They changed to become a company limited, a non-profit company, and they had no trouble at all. So they just reworded their constitution, and they had no problems whatsoever doing the transition. So I don't think PWD will either.
I don't think so either. But we'll just be literally changing a few, maybe a few clauses in the constitution and adopting the governance standards. It would literally be changing a few clauses in the constitution and adopting the Australian Charities Non-Profit Commission governance standards, which I think are fairly similar to what we do anyway, so I don't think it would change much at all.
Can I suggest what the board is proposing at this stage is that we would refer that sort of tranche of work to the Constitutional Committee that we appointed last year. But I think we'd also be interested in, given it'll now have a new remit to look at this issue, we would be interested to know if there are other members that want to be involved in that work as it goes forward and actually contribute to the discussion and the paper that will come out and the options that we start looking at. So if you could get your names to us and to the PWD staff here, we won't try and attempt that now, but at the end of the meeting, if you could approach me or other members of the executive and let us know if you're interested in being on that committee, we'll convene that and start that body of work looking at the pros and cons of this. And we would definitely go back out to the members with a consultation paper so that everybody gets an opportunity to see, well, what are the pros and cons of actually doing this? Is that a good way forward? Okay, so if so, I might move on to the next item, which is our major piece of business tonight, and that's the 2014 annual report. So we now have board and financial reports, and I'd like to formally table the annual report of People with Disability Incorporated for 2013-14. It's this document. Looks lovely this year, I have to say. Well done. Where's Leslie? It's a lovely picture of you on the cover. I really want to acknowledge the directors and staff who work so hard to draft and compile the reports. A lot of work has happened to get the report available prior to the meeting once again, and it's been available since last week with some supplementary documents that we've been advised by the auditor to include today. I'd like to seek leave of the meeting to speak to my report first of all. Leave granted? Yep. Thank you. Well, I want to start off this year by talking about our governance work. While you might see the work that we do in the media or online, all of that is really dependent on us having a strong organisation with a watchful board. In some ways, I think that we are still feeling the after effects of the defunding of the hotline 3 years ago, and those of you who can remember the 2012 AGM will know what a difficult place we were in then. Unfunded and underfunded work continues to be a strain on our organisation, and I think we can see that to some extent in the audit report. The audit report, when it came through initially, actually troubled us because we were carrying a lot of unfunded and underfunded work, a lot of staff liability, a lot of annual leave, a lot of time in lieu. Thankfully, while we still have those issues, we end the calendar year in a much better position than the financial year due to additional projects and income. But the board is very focused on managing those unfunded liabilities. We have a plan in place, and parts of that plan have already activated. There are many changes happening to funding at both the New South Wales and Commonwealth level. The long-term future of advocacy funding, as we have known it, is unclear. I want to be straight with you. These are tricky times that we are heading into. Next year, in June 2015, our Queensland and New South Wales advocacy contracts with the Department of Social Services actually expire, and there's an indication that they'll be going out to tender. What is true is that we continue to be highly competitive for project work. And this year we commenced projects to support the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child abuse and neglect. And I think I can tell people, Matt, that we've got an extension of that project for 2 years. We lobbied for an extension to the actual Royal Commission, and we're really glad that people with disabilities will have a chance to tell their stories for another 2 years, and that we'll be supporting them through that. And we've just announced a project to develop a scorecard for the NDIS. PWD also formed the National Cross Disability Alliance, which we hope will be highly competitive in the National Peaks tender. And I want to really acknowledge the contributions of our partner organisations in that alliance, the National Ethnic Disability Alliance, and Suresh is somewhere here, who's on the board of NEDA, Children with Disability Australia, First Peoples Network, and Women with Disability Australia. It is really great to see cross-disability organisations coming of age and coming together. And we need a strong national peak now more than ever. It's been a momentous year for disability again on the national stage. We've had the launch of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, renewed proposals to change the disability support pension, the axing of a dedicated Disability Discrimination Commissioner, and the ABC's decision to cease funding for the ABC ramp-up site. It's been a hard year, to be honest with you, but we've succeeded in protecting funding for the National Disability Insurance Scheme within a severe federal budget that had the most severe cuts to social programs since the 1970s, and some programs that hadn't been touched since the Second World War. On the 1st of July this year, all Australians began contributing to the NDIS through the Medicare levy, the levy that we called for as an organisation last year. And once again, we did intense media work in the lead up to this year's budget. Some of you may recall earlier this year, the scheme was being reviewed again and again, and it started to look like they were testing the waters to scale it back, cut it back, or knock it out. Well, they tested those waters, and PWD and our members came out strong. You all came out strong. Our board came out strong, and our staff came out strong. Parents and carers who may not agree with everything that we do came out strong on this issue as well. And to his credit, the Minister Fifield also came out strong as well. And to those who might be watching now in government and the bureaucracy, and believe me, they actually do, I say to you that the NDIS is off limits for our community now and forever. We know that we will need to fight this reform from budget to budget, and we are prepared to do that. We are also prepared, however, to be constructive and to help shape the scheme. The NDIS has now been almost like it's been reviewed by everyone else that could possibly review it in Australia, except for people with disabilities ourselves. And it's time that we had our say. If this is a set of trials, it's time that we had a jury. It's time that we had witnesses. It's time that we were heard. So for that reason, People with Disability Australia is launching a citizens jury project to provide the Australian community with the first user-led national scorecard on the NDIS. It will be delivered by Australians who've helped fund the scheme and those who have direct experience as participants within the 7 trial sites. We'll be becoming the experts, not relying on expert specialists who are consultants, senior bureaucrats, and people who aren't living the lives that we lead. The first part of that feedback is a social media forum, which is being held in the lead up to Saturday the 29th of November. It's open now, so you can hop on and be involved, but the crux of it will be on that Saturday. The hashtag is NDIS Jury, and the event is on our page now. We also need to have our say about jobs and welfare, because once again, we're in that part of the political cycle where people are talking about cuts to disability support pensions and the incomes that we live on. This year, we've seen welfare reform bombshells time and again. They happen on Sundays, they happen on Christmas Day, at Easter, and every time we made the point that we are not routers and we are not bludgers. We've been working and campaigning our whole lives. You know, when Joe Hockey talks about lifters and leaners, well, I say, well, we're actually the lifters and we work hard. This is what our members do. This is what you do. And you should see how hard Sam Connor, one of our board members, works. You know, the day that Facebook went down, I think Sam did it, possibly with a bit of help from George, I have to say. You should have seen Mark Tonga out in Macquarie Street in front of Parliament in New South Wales fighting for changes to the wrong taxi subsidy scheme, which is capped at a miserable level, out there protesting. You should see Therese Sands, our co-CEO, talking about violence against women. You should see Matt and our team of individual advocates. I just met individual advocates from the Fraser Coast, and we've got a number of them here tonight. These advocates now assist one person with a disability every hour, every day of the entire year. Last week, we heard the results of our quality audit, which said that our advocates treat people with professionalism, compassion and respect. And all of us in this room and watching online are working hard recruiting other members. Our online engagement strategy means that we now have a reach of 17,000 people around Australia. Our membership is 10 times what it was since we adopted free online membership in 2012. So I think we should actually give the whole membership and all of PWD a round of applause for that one. Speaking of working hard, no one works as hard as people in Australian disability enterprises. When we campaign in PWD about ADEs, we are not saying that they are sheltered workshops where people aren't doing proper work. We are not saying, as was said on the radio last week by a prominent media commentator, that it takes 4 people with a disability to do the work of 1 person without a disability. Thank you very much. We are saying that people in them deserve to be paid properly for the work that they do. If we're to judge workers' productivity, then we say let's apply that to everyone. Let's apply it to the public servants who decided to fund businesses to pay low wages so that those people could stay on the disability pension, which the government says it wants to reduce. Let's take the assessment tool there and see what pops out. Let's apply wage assessments to politicians who have failed on disability and jobs, including in the public service. Instead of focusing on welfare, we need a real safety net and real jobs. And it is time for us to say plainly that not everyone can work in our current jobs market. I think sometimes we've actually been saying, well, it's just about, if we created the jobs, just about finding everybody a job. I think that there are some people who have so many barriers in front of them, and the system is set up in such a way that it's not reasonable that those people can work. And for those people, we need a decent safety net so that they can live decent and reasonable lives. We will always need that safety net, and that is not a life of poverty on Newstart. Newstart is $166 a week less. That will mean people are homeless and in poverty. But that safety net should also not become a trap. It should not be a place where we dump people. It should not be a way to reinstitutionalise ourselves. This year, the government appointed a Freedom Commissioner. Now, some people may have scoffed, but too many of us actually don't have economic freedom. You can do a lot with money. You can sustain social networks. You can acquire assets. You can go on holidays like everyone else and save for retirement. That's the freedom that we need, and that's the project that we're putting forward in our jobs plan and in our advocacy on this issue. And look, that's enough for me. I would, though, like to thank all of the members for your trust again in asking me to be president for a second time. I want to acknowledge the executive. I want to acknowledge Fiona Given, Faye Druitt, who's not able to be here, and Christy. Fiona and Christy are taking a break from the board. Handcuffs, so I'd tie you to here and make sure that you couldn't go. Christy is going to be continuing working on a project for us for a little while, and after that I hope that we can co-opt you and drag you back to the board. Look, thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions on my report. Questions without notice? No? If not, then I'll invite a mover and seconder for the motion that the President's report be accepted. Thanks, Tom. And Kevin? Okay, all those in favour? Aye. Against? None? Okay, the ayes have it. Thank you. Mark Tonga is going to be Faye Druitt's an apology tonight. However, I'd like to invite Mark Tonga, who's worked on the Financial Advisory Group this year and on our risk management strategy work, to present the Treasurer's report and the audited financial statements. Thanks, Mark, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I read out the Treasurer's report, could you allow me to read a letter from our Treasurer?
Mm-hmm.
I apologise for not being able to be here today to present my Treasury report to you, our members. But I have had family issues which came up and needed to be attended to them. In my place, I've asked Mark Tonga, a director of the board and a member of the Financial Audit and Advisory Group, to kindly agree to present the report in her place. If there are any queries, then I can answer them upon my return. Thank you for considering the Treasurer's Report of People with Disability Australia for the financial year 2013 to 2014, which I present to you today. It is an accurate account of the recording of our income and expenditure that supported the governance and project work of People with Disability Australia has carried out on your behalf as our members. I would like to thank the Chair, Craig Wallace, the leader of our Board of Directors, and the directors for this focus on ensuring we weather the usual financial ups and downs all community organisations face. Also, I would like to thank the co-CEOs, Teresa Sands and Matthew Bowden, who have provided me with advice and support in my role as the Treasurer throughout the last financial year. Chief Assair, who could not be here with us today as he is taking a leave to see his family, who live on the other parts of the world, who live in other parts of the year, who needs a big thank you as he has provided financial advice and developed financial reports that are accessible to us all. This year, the members of the Financial Audit and Advisory Group have also worked very hard, and what else can the Treasurer say? But thank you very much. Last but not least, I would like to thank you, the members, for your constant support of the work of the Board of Directors that carries out on your behalf. So now I'm going to go on to presenting the financial report for the year 2013-2014 for your consideration and approval. And I will talk to you upon my return. Thank you. So I'm just going to carry on with the Treasurer's report now. So, thanks. Just reading from the AGM financial report. I have the pleasure in presenting the audit and financial statements for the 2013-14 financial year. For the benefit of providing information to members, I can report for the year 2013-14, the profit and loss statement shows that PWDA achieved a net loss of $532,490, while the balance sheet shows that cash at bank and fixed deposit amounts to $804,000.07. Income. In the 2013-14 financial year, PWDA received funding and other income as follows. Government funding, 2.230828. Other non-recurring funding of $528,400. Fundraising of $17,704. Trading activities of $16,871. Other non-operating income of $393,157. The net loss is mainly attributed to the relocation of the fit-out of the new PWDA's main office in Redfern. The relocation cost us approximately $400,000. It is expected that better profit outcomes will be achieved in the next financial year, 2014-15, and in the following financial years. Expenditure. In the financial year of 2013-14, $400,000 from the reserves in the bank was spent on the new office fit-out and equipment, including a new server, replacing old computers, and ergonomic office chairs. These purchases have improved the safety of the work environment, and the adaptive equipment has improved accessibility and everyday functionality within the office, enhancing delivery of member support and the administration of fundraising activities. Purchase of these items are placed as well to provide improved services to our members as well as the wider community. Most of us, in relation to new office equipment, have been including the assets account of the balance sheet. The regular office expenditures such as salaries, rent, telephone, insurance, superannuation, postage, stationery, subscription, and bank charges, etc., are shown in the profit and loss statement. These expenses are unavoidable. The liability section of the balance sheet includes an amount of $371,003, representing total staff entitlements. We intend to fund this liability by depositing the funds into a term deposit. We acknowledge this liability is high, and the board has a strategy in place to reduce the liability by the end of the next financial year. During the 2013-14 budget process, introduced in the previous financial year, was revised and updated. As a consequence, the board has been better informed regarding the detail of all income and expenditure, and is able to plan more accurately. For the forthcoming financial year, 2014-15, a draft budget has been developed and will continue to be useful management tool for the board as it's been updated as required until there is a regular pattern of income and expenditure. I am confident that this budget will deliver a surplus for PWDA. Thank you for your attention and allow me to present the Treasurer's report.
Thanks very much, Mark. I'll invite questions. If not, thank you very much, Mark, for not only working through that report, but your assistance throughout the whole year, and we'll convey that to Faye as well. I'd like to invite our mover and seconder for accepting the Treasurer's report. I saw Stuart. I've seen Leslie. Thank you, Leslie. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. The ayes have it. Turning to we have to accept the official audited financial statements in the report. I'll assume that there's no questions on those because there was no questions on the Treasurer's report, which that was part of. So we just need a mover and a seconder for accepting the audited financial statements, which you have. So I saw the gentleman up the back, whose name I don't have. Yep. Sorry, I didn't catch your name, sir. Neil Owen. Okay, Neil, and up the front. Yep. Thank you. Frank. Okay. All those in favour? Against? I'll declare that carried. Our next item is the appointment of the auditor. I have to say we have a very, very diligent auditor. Like, he came in quite early on and talked to us about this and helped us sort of work through the implications of our audit report and provided us with really thorough advice. So I think the recommendation is that we are reappointing LBW and Partners. So can I invite our mover for, I think I saw David, that we appoint them LBW and Partners as the Association's auditor for the 2013-14 financial year. Seconder. Saw Leslie. Tim just missed out. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. The board has nominated Fiona Gibbons, actually agreed to continue to be our public officer, I think. This is a bit we didn't sort out beforehand. Yes? Thanks, Fiona. Fiona is based in Sydney, and it makes sense to be able to sign documents here as well. So I'd like to move that, or invite a mover for the motion that Fiona Given be appointed as our public officer. I saw Stu. So Alex up the front, Alistair up the front. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Returning officers report. The returning officers report was distributed prior to the meeting, and copies are available here. The returning officer, Annette Van Gent, has apologised, so I'm delegating this task of reading the returning officer's report to Matt. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Craig. So the report was dated Monday the 27th of October, and she says, "Dear members, on Monday the 15th of September 2014, all full PWDA members were invited to submit nominations for the 6 director positions of the PWDA board, as well as nominations for the president position that will become vacant at the PWDA AGM to be held today on 13th of November 2014. The 5 candidates with the most votes will be elected to a 2-year term. The candidate in 6th place will be elected for a term of 1 year to fill a casual vacancy created by the resignation of a board member who resigned within the first year of their 2-year term. Following the call for nominations, the 6 director positions, 13 valid nominations were received and an election was required. 1 valid nomination was received for the position of president. As this position is uncontested, Craig Wallace will continue as president for another term of 2 years. The nominations received were as follows: Thomas Banks, Rebecca Biddle, Kevin Boyce, Mark Horrell, Stuart Morby, Jared McLaughlin, Bonnie Millen, Wayne Alexander Nevinson, Neil Owen, Suresh Rajan, Trudy Ryle, Ebru Samactus, and Joel Wilson. 774 hard copy and electronic ballot papers were sent to eligible members on the 3rd of October 2014. The election period closed at 5 p.m. on the 24th of October. At that time, a total 100 ballots were received, 21 hard copy and 79 electronic, representing a response rate of 12.9%. The final count of ballot papers occurred at 3:30 p.m. on Monday the 27th of October at Level 10, 1 Lawson Square, Redfern, the offices of People with Disability Australia, with my oversight and 4 scrutineers. Of the 100 ballots received, 95 ballots were valid, 4 abstained and 1 was invalid. Results of the election for position of director. After preferences were allocated, the final count for the successful candidates were as follows. Thomas Banks, 7 votes. After preferences, 10. Rebecca Biddle, 6 votes. Kevin Boyce, 9 votes, 13 after preferences. Mark Horrell, 4 votes. Stuart Morby, 21 votes, 28 after preferences. Jared McLaughlin, 6 votes. Bonnie Millen, 8 votes, 13 after preferences. Wayne Alexander Nevinson, 2 votes. Neil Owen, 1 vote. Suresh Rajan, 9 votes, 10 after preferences. Trudy Ryle, 3 votes. Ebru Samactus, 7 votes. Joel Wilson, 12 votes, 18 after preferences. The following nominees are hereby declared directors to the PWDA board, commencing office on the 13th of November 2014. They are Stuart Morby, director who's returning, Joel Wilson, director who's new, Kevin Boyce, a director who's returning, Bonnie Millen, director who's new, Suresh Rajan, director who's new, Thomas Banks, director who's new. 5 elected directors with the most votes will be elected for a 2-year term. The candidate in 6th place will be elected for a term of 1 year to fill a casual vacancy created by the resignation of a board member who resigned within the first year of their 2-year term. The board member who will determine who these elected directors will fill the 5 positions for the 2 years and who will fill the term for 1 year. My recommendation to the board is to use the raw vote before preferences to determine the election of directors who will fill the one-year term. I also recommend that a resolution be passed at the first board meeting of the new board to implement that recommendation. Thank you for your participation. Scrutineers in attendance were Craig Andrews, Sue Barnes, Ibrahim Mohammed and Therese Sands. Yours sincerely, Annette Van Gent.
Thank you, Matt. I'd like to invite a mover and a seconder to accept the returning officer's report. Thank you. Seconded. And I'd like for us to accept that by acclamation. Well done. I wanted to actually invite the new members of the PWDA board to say a little bit about themselves and what their ideas are and what they're bringing to the board. So have we got roving microphones? Somebody's got one. Pete? Yep. So can we... Joel, would you be happy to start off? Sure.
This is awkward. Firstly, I'd like to thank all the individuals who encouraged me to nominate and helped me along the way with checking my nomination process and making sure that it looked good. And also the voting members who elected myself and all the other new board members. Without you, I wouldn't have this opportunity. As an autism activist, I have concerns for the 1% of the community with a diagnosis. These concerns, which include supports, education and employment, are of course relevant to the disability community in Australia as a whole, and it isn't something that can easily be fixed. As part of my role as a board director and member of People with Disability Australia, I'd like to work with other organisations and government bodies in my home state of Western Australia and also across the country. For example, I'm in discussions with the Human Rights Commission at the moment to look at university and TAFE and the issues that we face in regards to the lack of supports and stigma. Schools, employment and all these other things are also included under that. If we can educate employers and companies and education institutes to make environments accessible and use success stories to launch a campaign, maybe we can change the wider society views that individuals with disabilities aren't capable of being employed. The Australian government wants to get people with disabilities off the DSP and into employment without stopping and thinking about how many can't get work because the education system has failed them, or individuals have qualifications but workplaces aren't accessible physically, or in my situation, sensory processing differences, which includes lighting and sound. This needs to change. As a past worker in a sheltered workshop, which is now an Australian disability enterprise, which doesn't really sound any better, I have a strong belief that we, as people with disabilities, deserve to earn more than the equivalent of a loaf of bread for a day's work. I've expressed interest in being part of the wage justice campaign that PWDA is setting up. In closing, I'm primarily here to represent the members and to collaborate with the rest of the board, members, staff, and associated organisations. So if anyone has any concerns or projects, please get in touch. And I look forward to the next 2 years and beyond.
Wonderful, thank you. Do we want to pass the microphone to Thomas Banks? Are you ready, Tom?
Hey everyone, my name is Thomas Banks. I have a disability called cerebral palsy, but I tackle life with a fierce determination. I take the world on with a crazy smile. I work in the arts as a performer and writer, but I also run an innovative community engagement business where I go into all different settings to teach people about how to work and communicate with people who have disabilities. I'm really excited to be on the board of People with Disability Australia, and I hope I can bring my knowledge about the sector into my role as a board member. But I also hope I can bring along my creative background to put a smile on everyone's faces as we work together to create positive social change for the sector. I have spent the last 4 years developing a one-man show with 2 people, which explores my imperfect world as a gay guy with a disability and the challenges with communication which I come across every day. It will premiere in 2015, so if anyone is interested in seeing this show when it's on, please come and give your contact details to me so I can add you to the database. I also have a book too, which I wrote when I was only 16 years old. I'm looking forward to the year ahead. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Tom. And Tom will be available to sell his book to you later. While we've got the microphone at that end of the room, Suresh.
Can I just firstly start with acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we gather. We thank them for the use of the land, and we journey with them in their quest for reconciliation, and hope that it comes sooner rather than later. As Craig indicated earlier, I'm the president of the National Ethnic Disability Alliance. I shan't bore you with the other 42 other committees that I'm on, other than probably just mention a couple that might be of interest. I'm also on the Disability Subcommittee for the Federation of Ethnic Communities Councils of Australia, and I'm also the Vice President of Epilepsy Australia. And I'm an ambassador for the Count Me In strategy in Western Australia, and I also run a couple of organisations called West Australian for Racial Equality, and I'm on the Multicultural Advisory Group for the state government as well. I am the CEO of the Epilepsy Association in Western Australia. I've lived in Australia for 40 years. I came here as a 15-year-old. Having been born in Singapore, grew up in Brunei, studied in India, and then came here. I do a lot of work on radio and media generally. Had a career as a financial planner before I moved into the community sector and the Ethnic Communities Council, and later into the Epilepsy Association. One of the things that attracted me to come to PWDA was, look, I did a number of interviews. I run a radio program in Perth on the community radio station, and I guess the four primary interviews that I did that I enjoyed the most over the last 12 months have been with Graham Innes, Sam Connor, Joel Wilson, and Craig Wallace. And so I figured, all 4 of them are here. I might as well join them at some stage and come aboard. So, and when Sam Connor asks you, you don't deny it. You just go ahead and just do it. Look, and one of the main primary reasons for my coming on board was a conversation we had with the National Ethnic Disability Alliance, the NDIA, just in regard to the take-up rate of culturally and linguistically diverse communities in the NDIS regime and the disability services regime. It's estimated there are about 15% of people with disabilities who are from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, or what used to be named the ethnic communities in the past, but only 5% of that community takes up the services of the Disability Services Commission. So there's a great disconnect there. And I'm hoping that with the work that we can collaborate on with Craig and others here, that we will be actually able to make sure that everyone who's entitled to those services that are being provided under NDIS, etc., are being given those services that they're entitled to. And I guess, like Joel and Tom, look, I haven't written a book, and I don't intend to. I have two sons who take up my time. My boys are 12 and 10, and as we speak, my 12-year-old is battling Ross River virus back home in Perth, which is a challenge in itself. But my writing has been around books that they can read. I don't think I could go to the stage where I could write books for all of you all to read. But nevertheless, I think I'll work closely with Tom and Joel and Craig and Sam and others and Matt, and hopefully we'll get what we're trying to achieve all around, just equitability of services being delivered right through. Thank you.
Thanks, Suresh. Fantastic. Bonnie Millen, I want to hear from you. I think we need to get the microphone in front. Do whatever you're comfortable. Stand up if you like.
Whatever I'm comfortable with. Okay, I'll turn my chair around and I'll present myself. My name is Bonnie Millen. I hail in from Adelaide, South Australia. Very pleased and happy to be representing the new board. In June 2014, I represented PWDA in New York at the United Nations for the Conference of State Parties, and it was a success. It was an absolute pleasure to represent my organisation at such an international scale. At the side event, we spoke about regional and remote transportation and discrimination. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about, and it's something I would like to bring to the board as well, and to make more aware of regional and remote discrimination for people with disabilities. In the past, I've worked in criminal justice positions, so another part of my passion is representing those with disabilities in the criminal justice section, as well as those that have come and entered the prison system. It's becoming quite a statistic. In terms of that, I represent a number of organisations in South Australia, in particular Purple Orange and Julia Fire Association, where I am a youth mentor. I'm also a Girl Guide leader and a member of the YWCA Australia. In that case, I represent a lot of women's rights for people with disabilities. Yes, so I hope to bring to the board many expertise and experience. I'm so sorry that my public speaking is not one of my strong forts. Yes, so thank you very much for electing me, and hopefully next time you hear me speak, I'll be a little bit more confident and less rambly. Thank you.
Thank you. You weren't rambly at all. You're wonderful. Thank you. It's good to see we've got so many members that are out of the youth delegation that we did to the convention, both Joel and Bonnie involved in PWD and on the board this year. So we now move on to the constitutional amendments that are brought before the board this year. Are people happy to keep going to work through these? And then I think we are getting close to the end of the meeting, the formal part of the meeting, and then we'll have a break. People happy if we go for another 10 minutes? Yep. So was that Leslie? Did you... You're happy to keep going? Yep. Okay, so I want to hand over to Fiona just to introduce these.
Essentially, the proposed constitutional amendments overall reflect the diversity of the organisation and the fact that we are a national membership-based organisation. It will enable people to vote in a way which is suited to their needs. There are three versions of the amendment to clause 40.10. The rationale behind version 1 is that the presence of scrutineer is no longer feasible as the vote counting may be conducted anywhere in Australia and be outsourced by People with Disability Australia. We do not feel that removing the provision of scrutiny compromises the transparency and accountability of the returning officer's count. If Amendment Version 1 is not passed at this meeting, Version 2 again supports the outsourcing of the running of People with Disability Australia elections to a professional election company such as the Australian Election Commission, who could provide a scrutiny report as part of their contract for service. Alternatively, Version 3 retains the physical presence of a scrutineer, bearing in mind that they may need to travel to the place where the vote is being counted. This could be anywhere in Australia.
Thanks, Fiona. So has everybody actually got the constitutional amendments? So this document with the 2-column table. So what we're being asked to do is to pass a number of changes to the Constitution to enable us to still have online voting, which we did this year. The board has identified that there were some redundant leftover clauses from when we first passed the online membership package. As Fiona has pointed out, I'm sort of sensing, or I want to test with people, whether the first 5 of those are contentious, and then go on to discuss clause 40.10. So the first 5 of those are about essentially taking out references to postal and paper and anything that refers to non-online voting. If we don't do that, if we don't think those first 5 are contentious, I'd propose that a member of the meeting might like to move them in block, and that we just pass those and then we turn to the other one. Okay, thank you. Okay, so your motion is that we have to move the 2 things. We have to move that we take those motions as block. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. And then we have to actually move the motions we have to actually pass the motions. So that we agree the changes to 40.5, 40.6, 40.7, 40.8, and 40.9. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Now, with 40.10, as Fiona pointed out, the 3 proposals relate to the way that we would scrutiny our ballots using electronic voting. So the issue that we encountered this year trying to source companies that would do this is that when you have voting online, it's not counted in a place. It's counted in cyberspace, like it's counted on a computer or a server. So the choices are that if we've got version 3, it means we're doing ballots effectively the old way. Version 2 would mean that people still have the opportunity to scrutiny, but they scrutiny like a package, so they would get a folder with all of the sort of data in raw form that they could look at and work out that the vote's being done fairly. I have to say I'm not sure I should do this, but that's my preference, would be version 2, just for scrutiny and safety of our elections. Version 1 is that we wouldn't have a scrutineering process at all. We would rely on the returning officer. Is that more or less an accurate description? Yeah. So I just want to do a straw poll of the meeting. Yep.
It says in here that one option is to outsource. The option 2, an outsource. John Moxon.
Yep.
It says that one of the options in 2, or one of the aspects of option 2, is that it could be outsourced to, say, the Australian Electoral Commission.
Yep.
How much would that cost?
going to look at Matt here because I think we actually costed that.
I'm just concerned that we might vote for something and then find that the cost is so exorbitant that in fact it was a silly thing to vote for, that's all.
We outsourced it this year, just so you know, but to a private company. It was the AEC.
Oh, okay, so that at the moment that's already been done.
Yeah,
And how much did it cost?
I don't know.
Roughly.
Does anybody know? I thought it was about between 2 and 3 grand from memory. Yeah? Right. So
Okay.
between 2 or 3 grand.
Thank you.
What do we think about doing a straw poll, just of the 3 options? Okay. Joan.
I just wanted to question, is the fact that it was 2 or 3 grand to do with the fact that most of it was done online? Or, because there was still the provision for postal votes, wasn't there?
Yes, that's right. You can lodge a postal vote as well. So they've got to combine those 2 processes.
Okay, yes,
Yep.
because I know that the organisation I'm involved with has outsourced it to the State Electoral Commission, and I'm thinking it was more like $7,000, but it was all done by postal vote. So I'm assuming it's much more expensive to do it by postal vote than it is by online voting. Anyway, that's just a point of clarification, that's all.
And I'll go to Julie and say, the other thing I just want to just let people know is we were actually limited in who we could outsource it to this year because we had those redundant clauses in our constitution. The Australian Electoral Commission, I think, turned around and said, well, because you've still got some references to postal voting and it's confusing, we won't do it. So we had to go just to a private provider. Julie.
I just have a quick question about the accessibility of this. Our returns was 13%. Is that considered strong? And if it's not, was it because of access issues?
I don't know. It's not as strong as I'd like. I'd like 100. What do people think?
I'm just thinking, in previous years, was there a much better returning percentage? And have we lost percentage because of changing things?
I'll also ask the staff to sort of comment on this one, but my impression is it's always been quite low, and it was really low when we just had paper ballots. It's more now, but the proportions still worry us. You know, we would want it up to be above 13%. But we've got more people actually voting because they can vote online. We got other questions? Did I even answer your question? Yeah. So we do have more people involved, but I mean, it'd be really healthy to actually have elections where we had sort of 50 or 60% of the membership actually voting and competition. That's what the board really wants. And it's our social media strategy has been to really push our elections strongly and try and get them out there.
In my experience over many years, it's never been much higher than the report.
Thanks, Hazel. I might just I just want to do a straw poll, which means that if you like the option, then you just raise your voting card. It's not, we won't take this as the official count, but we'll then put the preferred option to the vote. How does that sound? I think that makes sense. So how many people like version 1, which is that we would count the optional preferential method and...
Sorry, Craig.
Yep.
Sorry, it's hard for you to see me over here at Sam French. I just wondered, just going back to the level of response to voting, is that because we've had a huge increase in membership? I mean, 13% of 200 members might... I don't know, do you think it's because of the quite large increase from what I understand in the number of members? Could have some impact on that.
That the percentage relatively looks low because we've got more. Is that what I think it's still the same group of people that always voted in PWD elections. Our really committed members are still voting, and it's because we've actually got more online members that looks like a smaller percent. So yes, that's true, but none of that takes away from the fact we would like more people voting. and involved in the elections. So version 1, which is that we would just remove the scrutineering option altogether. How many people support that? I don't think anybody does. Got one, got a couple, okay. Can we have somebody doing a count? Is that you, Peter, you counting? This is the straw poll, and we will take the one with the most votes and put it to the meeting as the vote. Okay, version 2 is the same as the rest of it, except that each candidate can request a scrutiny report from the returning officer. Thank you. Have we got? We still can. Yep. So version 1 had 10, version 2 has 18. And version 3, which is that we would go back to the old system, or we would go back to the traditional system, that the votes have to be actually counted physically in front of a scrutineer who's present. So that would mean we're kind of going back to paper ballots or needing to print them all out. How many people are in favour of that?
I think you need to clarify, at the expense of the candidate. So the candidate, according to this, will have to pay for a year to go wherever they are being counted. According to
Yep.
this. At the expense
Yep.
of the candidate. It is. Basically. That means that the candidate would have to fund either themselves to get there or another scrutineer.
Yep.
I think that's just an important caveat.
I actually don't understand how we would do an online election with having scrutineers physically present, because the problem that we had this year was that companies sort of said, well, we just don't do it like that. If it's an online vote, they're essentially opening it up inside the computer and just making it add up. But in terms of that option, how much support does that have? Does it have any support? Okay, Leslie, we got one. Yep, Peter.
Thank you. Just a question, because when there's a election for like political purposes, do they do online voting there?
Yep.
Right, that's specifically for people with disabilities, but I don't know, like, if I'm getting confused here, but
In the ACT, we have online
Yes.
voting.
The ACT is not a state of Australia.
Oh dear.
Sorry.
Don't tell them.
Sorry. It's not classified as a state, so I don't know how they class that or how it's classed. That's beyond me. It's a territory, so yes, I know that, but how that's classed or how that has any relevance to voting, I don't know. They might have their own rules in there. But what I'm talking about is PWD's voting system and the way it's been in the past and for how many years it's been that way. And there's never been a problem with it in the past. So I don't know whether we're going to... Right.
But the way that the Act are worded doesn't necessarily allow for that, so they've got to actually change the law in the same way that we've changed the Constitution.
Okay.
They have to change the laws of each state and territory
Right.
to make it able to accommodate electronic voting. So that's what's kind of been happening over the last few years.
Yeah, but the question is laying around how those votes are accounted for, or how they're scrutinised, isn't it? Isn't that what? Isn't that?
I'm not sure how they do it in electronic voting.
Right.
That's why we got we.
There would have to be auditing.
There would be auditing
Yes,
methods in
there are.
electronic
There are. We've checked that, and the auditing methods involve. It's just that you're not physically there as they're putting the ballot down and doing that. They print out sort of a data cube that you can look at, and they aggregate that, and you get that information in front of you. Right. I mean, the reason that the members adopted electronic voting was around disability access. One of the powerful reasons was that we had a system where a person with a disability who couldn't actually sign their name on a piece of paper and post a letter couldn't independently vote in our own elections. That was pretty rotten, so that's why we got rid of that.
All right. All right, thank you.
I think that we've got a proposition that we put version 2 to the meeting from that, so I'm going to do that, which is, so can we have a mover that 40.10 be amended to the version 2 text? Yep, thank you. I saw Tim and I saw Joan. Okay, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Declare that carried. Thank you, and thank you, Fiona and the governance bag, for the work on that. And that concludes the formal part of tonight's meeting, but please don't go away. Go and grab a drink and some refreshments, because we're going to be coming back to hear from our special guest speaker, Graham Innes, in Graham Innes Unplugged. We'll come back in about 10 minutes, so please join us then. Thank you very much. Go live. Okay, everyone, welcome back. We'll get going again. Tonight we are lucky to have Graham Innes joining us in conversation. Graham is a lawyer, mediator and company director, and was our Disability Discrimination Commissioner from 2005 to 2014. If you're joining the stream and the webcast, the hashtag is Innes Unplugged, and we'll be following that as we go. As a human rights advocate for the past 30 years, Graham has played a role in many human rights and disability initiatives, including the drafting of the UN Convention on the rights of people with disabilities. Graham is a life member of PWDA and was the founding chair, I believe, of Disabled People's International.
Correct. Yep.
Is that right?
So was I.
Yay. So the founding chair of us, really, because the Handicapped Persons Alliance transformed into us. Graham has agreed to an unplugged interview. We were debating what that actually meant earlier, because unplugged albums by bands tend to be where they kind of go back to their roots. What we mean is that everything is on the table and nothing is out of bounds. When I approached Graham about this, I said it'd be like conversations with Richard Fidler on the ABC. The only problem with that is that we couldn't get Richard Fidler. So you've just got me. But we do have Graham. So please make him very welcome.
Thanks very much.
Now, Graham, I read on the font of knowledge that is Wikipedia that, thank you, you were one of the first children to be sent to a mainstream school. And your coffee's just arrived, by the way. Smelling very nice.
No.
Coffee's important. Richard Fidler, I think, drinks coffee.
Yeah.
How did that come about, going to mainstream school, and what was it like?
Okay. Well, thanks, Craig. Can I just say firstly, and I will answer that question, but can I just say firstly how pleased I am to be here tonight amongst a number, many old friends who I have been involved with for a long time in the movement, and that's fantastic. But you know, the thing that excites me the most is to see the number of new active people seeking election on the PWDA board. And I'm really proud because you mentioned the delegation that we sent to the COST meeting, the Conference of States Parties, in June. And that was if you like, a joint initiative with PWDA and the Human Rights Commission. And it was one of the last things that I did at the Commission, because I really believe in succession and how important succession is. And isn't it fantastic that 2 of those 6 delegates have been elected to the PWDA board tonight, and that the other 4 are all involved in advocacy in the disability field, and I'm just so excited by that. So thanks, PWDA. But sorry, to answer your question, Craig, I just wanted to get that in before I forgot. But how did it come about? Well, there was a gradual process in education to integrate kids who were blind or vision impaired into ordinary high schools. And at year 10, I was one of the first to have the chance to actually go to my local school rather than going to a school that was an hour away by car. So I added 2 hours to my school day, travelling backwards and forwards in a taxi or a car up until year 10. And come the weekends, none of my friends lived anywhere near me. And so I was really pleased to have the chance to go to an ordinary high school. And that's not to say that the special school at North Rocks wasn't a great school. It was, and the teachers were passionate, committed and fantastic. But it's, for me, no question as to which was the better option, and that was going to my local school.
Mum and Dad, I've heard that they were involved in, I think it was the school for deaf and blind, and were quite active. Did they push you?
Well, they encouraged, certainly. My dad was the chair of the Parents and Citizens Association, and the great thing about my family was, and I don't know if they did it consciously or unconsciously, but I was the middle child of 3 siblings, and so I've got all those middle child problems that you know, people would be aware of. You know, quiet, introverted, not a lot to say, all of those sorts of things. But I was one of 3 kids, and my parents very clearly said, treated me as if I wasn't a special kid with a disability, but I was one of the 3 members of that family. And sure, they did things to balance up disadvantages that I may have, but they were very clear that I was one of three and that I wasn't going to be the special child. I think that made a huge difference for the whole of my life, so I thank them a great deal for that. And they encouraged me to go out and have a go, and they didn't set limits. So they wouldn't have any truck with people saying, "Oh, well, no, Graham won't be able to do that." I can remember Mum and Dad over and over as I grew up saying, "Graham can do anything he wants." And that was just so enlightening for me, and so it just opened so many options. And I'm writing my memoirs at the moment, and I've been writing about this just in the last few weeks because the first real discrimination I experienced was of any major impact was when I finished university and went out to get a job. And I spent 12 months not being able to get a job as a lawyer. And I eventually took a job as a clerical assistant in the public service. That was really the first time, and it was a pretty tough year because I knew I could do the job and I had the qualifications and I'd worked out how I was going to deal with not being able to see the printed material, but I couldn't convince employers that I could. And you know, that's why we need to change people's attitudes, and the sector really needs to focus on that.
Is that what made you become involved in advocacy? I mean, thinking about most of our advocacy journeys, it's often there's a pivotal moment where you just say, "I've had enough and I'm mad and I'm not going to take it anymore." Was that how you came to this?
Yep, it is, and that happened to me at university, and Royal Blind Society at that stage ran the Braille and Audio library and provision of materials in Braille and Audio, and they took a decision that the production of Braille and Audio material would be the same for university students as it was for library books that were going to go into the general library. And there wasn't a recognition that people couldn't study without alternative format material and without it being produced quickly. And a bunch of us at university did. We said, "Hey, that's not good enough." And of course that decision, as you were talking earlier at the AGM, was made without the voice of the students who are blind or had a vision impairment. And of course PWD doesn't stand for that and challenges government on that, and we challenged Royal Blind Society on that. And that was the first part of my my advocacy journey.
Fast forward to you becoming involved in Disabled People's International. We've all heard stories that it was an interesting organisation and had a robust culture. What was it like?
Well, I progressed from university through Blind Citizens Australia, which was then the National Federation of Blind Citizens. So at that stage I was not involved in the cross-disability field. And that certainly had a robust culture. There were, and Murray Shang's here tonight, she'll tell you that the conventions of the NFBC were free and frank and energetic debates of policy. And that's where I learned much of the skills that I've had to use as a political small p operator in the disability sector and in government over the years. And I suppose I got drawn into the cross-disability field in 1981, the international year, and I started to have greater involvement and links with people with other disabilities. And then I went to Singapore for the first conference of DPI International, with about 27 Australians, I think, went to that conference. And I came back, as did a few of us, sadly not the whole 27, but a few of us came back pretty determined to form our own organisation. And so we did that, and we worked hard with not much money across the country, developing this national organisation. It's a pretty hard thing to do. It's much easier these days with the internet and social networks, but it was pretty hard when you had to travel to meetings. We used to drive to meetings in Wagga and Albury. People like Laurie Alsop and Ian Irwin and Ian Cooper, who's sadly not with us any longer, and numerous others. It's always a risk when I start to name people. Joan Hume was certainly involved in those processes. And we built a national organisation which has sort of morphed into PWDA. So, and I was the founding chair of that. I wasn't the founding chair of the Handicapped Persons Alliance. That was, I'm not sure who that was. I can't remember who that was, but that wasn't me. But there is a funny story about the Handicapped Persons Alliance. You know, that was the first name that people with disabilities used, but the actual name first that was chosen was the Handicapped Persons Union. Remember this, Joan? And we were blocked by a significant union figure who later became Premier of New South Wales, and whose first name is the same as that of the previous New South Wales Premier. Who said you can't use the word union because you're not a union. Yeah, that's right, Barry Unsworth. Yeah, he was the Minister for Wearing Cardigans. He liked the cardigans.
So what did he say?
He just said you can't use that name. You're not a union. You're not a union. He was a union official at the time, and the organisation had to make the decision: do we have this stoush with the union movement when they've got thousands more members and hundreds of thousands more dollars than we have? Or do we just change it to Alliance? And we thought we had more important things to focus on, actually advancing the rights of people with disabilities, than having an argument about the name. But that was the first challenge that the organisation faced.
Bill Shorten has gone on record as saying that what he thought that people with disabilities needed was one big union that combined force of numbers and power of politics. Do you agree with that, or do you think that's a simplistic?
I think the message that Bill was giving us, really, when he made those comments, was you need to operate far more effectively as a sector. So you need to have a much more united voice on the issues where you can be united and which count for everyone. And he was right, because that really occurred for the first time in the campaign for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And that's one of the major reasons we've got that scheme, was that politicians saw for the first time people with disabilities had a unified voice on an issue. And I can tell you that woke up a lot of politicians and bureaucrats in Canberra and in state governments to the important force that the disability sector could be in Australia. And I think it's woken a bit of a tiger or a giant. And I think that disability campaigning now is going to be a very different thing to what it was before the success of the NDIS. So I don't think Bill really meant you have to all be in one organisation. I think what he meant was you have to have a united voice.
I want to take you back to the 1990s when you were working, I understand, on the drafting of the Disability Discrimination Act, or had some role in that. Is that right?
Yeah, I was chair of the Disability Advisory Council of Australia at that stage, and our key focus was to get national disability discrimination legislation enacted. And we had legislation in some states, New South Wales, Victoria, and a few others, South Australia perhaps. And we wanted national law, and that was one of the key things that I focused on while I was chair of the Disability Advisory Council. And being a lawyer and having worked in discrimination in New South Wales and then in Western Australia, I had a reasonable level of expertise in that area. So I was involved in the drafting of that legislation.
Now, the DDA turned 20 in 2012, and in the lead up to that, when you and I were doing quite a bit of sort of media around this, I started reading back through the second reading speeches in the Hansard, as you do. There's nothing else to do in Canberra. We just read Hansard.
Yeah.
And
Hansard, Wonk Creek.
I came across an endorsement for the DDA from another Graham, but not one that you might expect. Graham Campbell the former independent member for Kalgoorlie.
Well, Labor first and then independent.
Labor first, independent. I believe One Nation or close to.
Yeah, it could have been.
Now, those of you who remember this Graham Campbell was notoriously opposed to human rights legislation, hated the Australian Human Rights Commission, but he actually voted for the DDA, and in doing so made a really odd endorsement of it. And I want to sort of read that to you and get you to reflect on it. He said, "I'm not impressed with the bill. I, however, will not be voting against it because, as the bill says, it is not going to be a particularly expensive measure." I can hear Graham Campbell as "It is not going to achieve very much, and therefore, in my view, it is not, in the short term, going to do a lot of damage either." Now, what do you think of that endorsement? And 22 years later, do you think we've done much damage?
What a great question. I thought at the time that Graham Campbell had no idea, just no idea. When a number of us were campaigning for the DDA, we were quite strategic about in the same way as we were for the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, campaigning for Australia to ratify. We were quite strategic about downplaying the impact of the DDA, because we knew that whilst it wasn't the perfect bit of legislation, it was going to have a significant impact, financial and otherwise, and that it was going to do some damage. And I may draw some debate in this room, but you know, I've always been a glass half full guy. So I actually think that the 20 years of the DDA have been very effective in changing the shape of Australia with respect to people with disabilities, with one major caveat, and I'll come back to that. But when you think about the fact that the DDA caused probably the biggest spend in transport infrastructure that's ever occurred in this country in terms of the move towards accessibility of public transport. And we're not there yet, but we're a hell of a lot further along than we were in 1992. When you think that over the next 50 years, which is when the building stock in Australia turns over, once every 50 years, over the next 50 years, buildings will be accessible for people with disabilities. When you think that the internet, whilst not perfect, and Giselle Mesnage lodging a complaint against Coles just the last couple of weeks demonstrates that it's not perfect, the internet is far more accessible as a result of Bruce Maguire's case against the Sydney Organising Committee of the Olympic Games. We have captioning on television and in cinemas. We have audio description in cinemas, not yet on television. We need to keep working on that one. There has been a huge impact over that 20 years, and I think that the DDA has played a significant part in that. The one area where the DDA hasn't had a positive impact, I don't think, is ironically the area that initially the DDA was going to be all about, because the DDA was initially proposed as only applying to the area of employment. And that was the first model, and some of us lobbied hard to ensure that it was broadened out. But that was the first recommendation. And we haven't changed the employment landscape for people with disabilities in Australia. And you guys know as well, if not better than I do, the impact of that in terms of keeping us, 45% of us in poverty. And I think the reason we haven't changed it is because we really haven't yet, despite all the infrastructure change, we haven't yet changed the general public's attitude towards people with disabilities and the limiting way in which we're viewed. And that's why I want to have some impact in that area. I wanted to while I was at the Commission, but I want to continue to now that I've left.
So does that represent a sort of shift for you, moving away from seeing a legislative instrument as the power to change, to seeing this as being about changing attitudes as the main way to change Australia?
I've always thought that you needed both, and I blogged about this just today, actually, that you can have as many laws as you like, but if you don't have change people's views of disability, then we won't, those laws won't be enacted. And I told the story of something that happened to me just last week when I walked through Wynyard railway station and I asked the guy at the ticket barrier where the escalator was to go up to, that's Carrington Street. And he said, "Where do you want to go?" And I said, "I want to go on the escalator up to Carrington Street." I thought I'd made it fairly obvious. But, and he said, "Yes, but where do you want to go?" And I said, "I want to go to the top of the escalator that leads up to Carrington Street." And he said, "Oh, well, we've got a lift that will take you up there." So he did a couple of things. Firstly, he made my decision for me. Everyone else without a disability would decide whether they'd take the escalator or the lift. He thought it was perfectly okay to make that decision for me. So despite the fact I'd said escalator 3 times, he was going to show me the lift. And in doing so, he very effectively disempowered me. None of you will be surprised to hear that I went up the escalator, but a lot of other people, without my assertiveness and experience and the fact that I'm tall and white and male, a lot of other people would have just gone on the lift, and so we have to change that approach. And as I said, you can have accessible parking spots, but if people who don't need them park in them, we can't use them. You can have signage which is only in words, and that won't help people with some people with intellectual or learning disabilities. And I gave a whole lot of other examples in my blog. So yeah, we've got to change those attitudes, and that's why I think the tagline for the Don't Diss My Ability campaign is right this year, because it's inclusion or exclusion. It's your choice. So it's not us that, we know what we want, but it's the community that have to make that choice and include us.
Sorry, Dr. Kevin Boyce, can I ask a question? I don't know if it's question time.
We might at the end. We're just going to get through. We're doing this interview style, so we've got some things I want to get to that we've agreed to talk about. The other thing that's revealing, Graham, from 1992, the time of the DDA, was that and reading back into the parliamentary record, is that the coalition actually opposed the DDA and tried to get it shunted off to a Senate inquiry.
Yes.
Yet 2 years earlier, in the United States, George H.W. Bush, the sane one,
the first George Bush,
first one, signed into law an Americans with Disabilities Act. And now we have the coalition coming in and abolishing your position and defunding ABC Ramp Up. Why is it that in Australia we haven't landed the idea that disability rights is bipartisan?
I don't know. I mean, look, I think it's hard to relate the coalition's opposition to the DDA to the actions of the Attorney General last July. So I'd like to sort of separate those two things out, because I think it's important to remember that it was the coalition and Philip Ruddock as Attorney General who ratified the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. So I think, whilst you're right, the coalition did oppose the bill and try to move it to a Senate committee, and it was the coalition under Howard that significantly delayed the access to premises standards, which a Labor government, a Rudd government progressed through. Coalition under Howard that significantly delayed the access to transport standards, but we finally got those through. But with no enforcement or policing processes involved, and that's one of the reasons that the DDA is not perfect. So I suppose the more conservative forces in politics have been the more that have opposed disability rights. But can I talk about the decision in July? It was an incredibly flawed decision to not appoint a full-time Disability Discrimination Commissioner with lived experience of disability. But there's a few things that led to it. And it was, I think, largely a decision made in the Attorney General's office. And it wasn't, whilst it went through Cabinet, It went through Cabinet with a whole lot of other stuff in the budget, and I think a lot of people, including Mitch Fifield, really hadn't picked up on the fact that the position was being abolished. Because I actually think we have supporters in, we have a supporter in Mitch Fifield, and that he wouldn't have let it happen, and I think he's quite embarrassed by it. He won't say that while he's minister. It'd be interesting to hear what he says after he's no longer minister. And it happened for these reasons, that George Brandis, the Attorney General, was absolutely determined to get his own person in the Human Rights Commission. And so he appointed as a Freedom Commissioner, is what he called him, he's actually filled the position of the Human Rights Commissioner, Tim Wilson from the Institute for Public Affairs, which is a clearly very right-wing funded, right-wing think tank. Let's call a spade a spade. And so that position had been slated to be removed from the Human Rights Commission, that is the position of Human Rights Commissioner, because it was pretty much redundant. The President had been carrying out that role for the last little while. There were now a range of other commissioners. There are, I think, 6 commissioners, and we didn't need a Human Rights Commissioner. But rather than, and that wasn't abolished when Nicola Roxon pulled the racial, the laws to change the Racial Discrimination Acts and other acts after the ridiculously run free speech debate, and she pulled the whole bill, and rather than what she should have done, which was separate the sensible amendments to other legislation, which were tidy up and improvement amendments, and just put them through. She just pulled the whole bill. And that was, you know, in the closing days of the Gillard government, when a whole lot of those silly decisions were made. And so Brandis used that position, despite the fact that, you know, he tried to explain it politically other ways. Brandis used that position to put his own man in the Human Rights Commission. And so what that meant was there were too many commissioners. And disability was the first one that was coming to an end. I expected, I thought that this might happen, you know, when that decision was made to appoint Tim Wilson in January. And so we were the first one that was coming to an end. My term was ending. He probably wasn't going to reappoint me, and it was an easy fix. Well, we'll just phase the Disability Commissioner into another position. It's just such a flawed decision when it was a position representing 20% of the population, 38% of the complaints lodged, double the next biggest amount of complaints lodged with the Commission. I mean, it was just a ludicrous decision. And you know the worst part about, no, not the worst part, one of the really inappropriate parts is, you know how I found out that that decision had been made? I read it on page 260 something of the federal budget. All of the time that I was Commissioner, whenever a significant change was going to happen in the Commission, which related to my portfolio, I would get a call from a staffer in the Attorney's office, Coalition or Labor. That never happened in Brandis's office. And so that's how I found out about the decision, and it's just, I think, one of the most flawed decisions that this government's made. But it shows, sadly, the fact that we're not there yet in terms of a campaign. We can be easily dismissed, because whilst there was some, you know, strong opposition at the time, there was no real move to fix the problem, and there still hasn't been. Not to reappoint me, I didn't want another term anyway, but to fill the position full-time with a person with lived experience of disability.
So you wouldn't have accepted another term? You're planning to retire?
If they'd come to me and said, would you do another 12 months while we go through an appointment process, I probably would have done that. But I mean, I've been in the role for 9 years. They're tough roles. I was probably ready to bring things to an end. A friend of mine always tells me that the best time to leave a job is 6 months before you should. And I think that's right. And so I had thought for the last 12 months that I actually didn't think I'd be offered an extra term, but I thought I'll have to think pretty hard if they offer it to me. I might take 12 months, but I probably wouldn't take more than that.
Graham, on the 1st of May last year, the Myer Chief Executive, Bernie Brooks, told a Macquarie Investment Bank seminar that the Medicare levy would stop people buying things at Myer and hurt his business. How did you feel when you heard this?
I was as appalled and pissed off, if I can use that expression, as most people in the disability sector. To think that a chief executive of a major retail store could comment on such an important measure as the NDIS, and I won't go into the arguments in support of the NDIS because you all know them, and to say, well, it'll hurt our sales. Well, you know, cry me a river. So I was appalled, and I thought about it a lot in that first 24 hours after he'd said it. And I actually tried to contact his office to say, Bernie, because I knew, having been president of Royal Blind Society and working to form Vision Australia, I knew of his and Maya's significant contribution to disability organisations. So it wasn't a comment made out of lack of charity. It was just a silly throwaway line when he was asked that question in an investors meeting, which I think he thought would never get to the media, and it did. And I saw the outrage on social networks, and I actually tried to contact his office and say, just go out and say, I should never have said this. I'm really sorry. The NDIS is really important. Maya is behind it, and end of story. So someone advised him in Maya to come out with this Clayton's apology, which was, we're sorry for anyone who may have been offended. You know, and I think actually that annoyed me almost as much as the initial comment. And I remember this really clearly because I was sitting in the Qantas lounge in Canberra Airport, coming back from Canberra, some meeting that I'd been at, sitting thinking, what are we going to do about this? And I had attempted to contact his office and not got through. And I said, this is just outrageous. We're close to the most important reform in the disability sector for I don't know how long, and you can get away with saying something like this. And so that's when I started the petition. And history tells the rest of the story. There was about 25 or 30,000 people signed onto that petition, and it got huge support. I think it just touched, the way I felt was the way that lots of other people felt.
So was the petition, about a...
I won't shop at Myer anymore. Frank.
Do you shop at Myer, Graham?
No, I haven't shopped at Myer since. I have not shopped at, made a very conscious decision. We actually had a Myer card, and I cut it up that day. and I have not shopped at Myer. Now, I can't vouch for the rest of my family. I think my 17-year-old daughter may have been in there a few times, but I have not walked across the Myer threshold.
So was it the non-apology that made you do the opinion, do the petition?
Yeah, it was. It was. It was the non-apology. Because I thought, look, he's had a chance and he's really stuffed that up. And in so doing, just dissed a whole lot of people with disabilities throughout Australia. Said, well, I really don't think... I mean, the effect of the apology was, I really don't think you should have been offended by my remarks, but if you were, I'm sorry. Well, I'm sorry, but that wasn't good enough.
Did you have a moment where you've got the petition ready to go and you're about to launch it, your fingers sort of paused over the button?
Yep.
Did you have a moment where you thought, oh, this might be tricky?
I had a moment where I thought, you're going to go close to a line here. And I thought, and I always used to do this, I tried to be really careful. I can't claim 100% success. I always tried to be careful when I sent any email that I thought was, angry or tough, and I just sit and think about it. And if I could, I'd actually sleep on it. But I knew I couldn't with this one, because if I was going to go, I had to go straight away. And I just thought, am I crossing a line here? What's the core of this issue for me? And the core of the issue for me was that I was appointed as the Disability Discrimination Commissioner to advocate for the rights of people with disabilities. And I just thought, I'm letting people with disabilities down if I don't push this button. And so I pushed the button.
You sure did. So we'll fast forward a few weeks, and on the actual day of the launch of the NDIS, and there is a serious backlash underway. There's a statement from Paul McClintock, Gillian Triggs has been grilled by Emma Alberici on the Late Line program. The nub of some of that criticism, particularly by the IBA, was that as a public official, you should not have been involved in what they called a political campaign. How do you respond to that?
Well, the 6 commissioners, the portfolio commissioners, they call it, the Human Rights Commission, are advocacy commissioners, and we don't have any opportunity to handle the complaints that are lodged at the Commission for the very reason that we're advocates. And I don't think what I said about Myer was any different to what I'd said about dozens of other employers with regard to, because I challenged them, as people will recall, to commit to 10% employment of people with disabilities as a real apology rather than a Clayton's apology. I had said that to dozens of other employers, and they'd gone away and thought about it, and many of them had started to do it. And I'd criticised Jetstar for their poor service, as I've done again this morning. I'd criticised other airlines. I'd criticised governments. I mean, that's why you have a commissioner, to say, hey, hang on, there's some rights here which aren't being followed through with, and you need to lift your game. And to try and run this line that commissioners could only be critical of governments is just a nonsense. Commissioners, through Tom Calmer, Mick Gooder, Liz Broderick, I could just go on, have been critical in their own areas. One of the tactical errors that I made about this process was after the petition was that I tried to be collegiate, and I let Gillian Triggs handle the discussion on the issue. And she took a tactical decision to just go quiet because it would blow over. And Paul McClintock, the chair of Myer, was never going to let that happen. He saw this, and he's linked closely with the IPA. He saw it as an opportunity to really beat up on human rights more broadly. So I was just the particular whipping person for that process. And I should have been far more assertive than I was. And in hindsight, that's where I made a mistake. I should have come out far more strongly and publicly, rather than letting Gillian handle it, because I think her softly approach just didn't work. But for Paul McClintock to do what he did on the 1st of July, which was the launch day of the NDIS, to have an editorial in The Australian critical of, in particular, the Disability Discrimination Commissioner and of the rights of people with disability, was either awesomely stupid or a calculated insult to the disability sector. And I actually think Paul McClintock is too smart for it to have been the first one. And I have always viewed it as a calculated insult to the disability sector, coming from a man who tends to operate in that way. He's a bully boy. And I should have stood up more than I did.
Because these are both heavy hitters.
Yep.
Bernie's a heavy hitter too.
Yeah, he is, but I actually think it was taken out of his hands pretty soon after the petition. I actually think, I've met with Bernie Brooks some years ago. I think Bernie Brooks and I could have sorted this out. And I think we could have come up with a far more positive conclusion for Myer and the disability sector. But McClintock wanted to play the tough guy and be the heavy hitter, and that's what he did. And look, I copped the brunt of that. I copped some flack as a result of that.
Were you amazed that the petition got up to, was it 38,000?
38,000.
38,000 signatures. And do you think that says something about the way that disability is now sort of front and centre?
I do. I think it says something about social networking and the power of it to the disability sector can harness. I mean, look, I've played a bit with social media and social networking, and there was an opportunity there, and I went for that opportunity. I mean, I know that. I'm not. I wasn't a novice on Twitter or on these sorts of petitions. I didn't think it'd get quite the impact it did, but I thought it would. I thought there was a nerve there that I was going to touch when I pressed that button.
Here in 2014, we have the NDIS trials, and we seem, touch wood, to have a long-term commitment. What do you think is the next big challenge?
The next big challenge is jobs. We have to change the numbers of people with disabilities in jobs, and we have to, as you've said a lot, Craig, we've got to break the mould. The current system of of getting people into jobs, people with disabilities, is not working. So there's no point trying to tweak that, which is sadly what this government's doing. There's no point trying to tweak that and keep that model. We have to change the model completely. I think that's the next big challenge, alongside the whole challenge of attitude change, and that's why I've lined up with the Attitude Foundation, because we have to break this view of people with disabilities, and I think the way we can do it, which is the way that Attitude wants to do it, is to have people with disabilities use the medium of television and the other media to tell stories about our achievements, about us doing work, doing community activities, and just doing life. And we're the most effective people to tell out those stories. We need to tell our own story, and we need to tell those stories. And if we can get support for Attitude, and we'll be running 6 sort of taster programs in December at 6:30 at night on a Saturday night, starting in December. If that model works and resonates, and we can raise the funds, we'll do a half an hour episode a week starting in the middle of next year.
Wow, well done.
Well, we're not there yet. We've got to get the money in the bank, but that's the plan.
What can people do to help?
We're on ausattitude.org.au is our website, and we're on Twitter and Facebook. Attitude.org.au is the website, and ausattitude on Twitter and Facebook. Should get my names right. And I think people, if you could go to those sites and support the organisation, not only financially, but use the power of social networking, particularly when we crank up our campaign in December to promote those trial programs, so that they become a really big thing on Twitter. I'd love to see each Saturday night, I'd love to see, the hashtag for the program trending on Twitter and Facebook. That will show people with the big money, and look, anyone in this room with big money, please come on board financially. But I also understand, being part of the disability sector, that's it's not where the big money is. But having it trend on Twitter and really be popular will show the people with the big money that there is support for this sort of program, and that's how we'll get finance. So you can support us in a whole lot of other ways than financially, just by talking up the Attitude programs when they come on.
What's the hashtag?
Well, it'll be a different hashtag for each program, but if you follow ausattitude, then you'll see we'll be telling people what the hashtag is. And if you become a supporter of the site, attitude.org.au, we'll be telling the site what the hashtag is. It'll be a different hashtag each time.
I hear you're writing a book.
Yeah, I am writing my memoirs with, you won't be surprised to hear, a lot of sort of disability advocacy mixed in amongst it, and quite a few of the stories that I've talked about tonight. I'm hopeful that I'm negotiating with publishers at the moment, hopeful that that might come out sometime next year. We'll see how that goes, how well I can keep the writing going. I'm also trying to be involved with a number of directorships, so I'm been appointed to 2 boards, and I'm doing a lot of consultancy and public presentations. I said to my wife Maureen, well, now that I've finished at the Commission and I start saying to people, I'm happy to come and make a speech, but I'm going to have to charge you money. Didn't charge PWD money, but I'll charge people who have the money, that they'll stop asking me, but they haven't. So that's nice. So so that's sort of working for me. And look, I just view what I'm doing as continuing to be an advocate. I'm just doing it from a different space.
Graham, thank you very much for that. Are you happy to stay for about, we've got, I think, the live feed going for another 10 minutes for the webcast. Are you happy to take some questions on the floor?
Yeah, no, happy to take questions.
I saw Kevin earlier. Kevin. We need to get a microphone to you.
Oh, sorry. Kevin Boyce.
Yeah.
I'm like yourself. I use the guide dog for mobility. I'm studying an advanced diploma at RMIT in Melbourne, And I use a study buddy to help me with my notes, but my study buddy is not allowed into the examination chamber with me. And I wonder why, because when I questioned them, they said, well, maybe he's influencing their answers. Secondly, but the most important point, the federal government and, well, more so the state of Victoria, where I come from, has a 10-year disability plan. I think we're into year 6 now. It's all about inclusion, not segregation. So how does the DDA fit into that new model?
Well, look, on your first question, Kevin, I don't think that's one I can answer. That's an individual decision about your particular disabilities and the impact of those disabilities, and making sure that the impact of the exam is an equal test of your skills and of all the other candidates. So I'm not sure that I can comment too much on that one, except that it needs to be equal and non-discriminatory, clearly. But on your second question, I mean, I think the DDA fits into that very nicely, in the sense that the DDA gives us a tool to use if we are discriminated against. And look, I don't say it's the perfect tool, but it's a pretty good tool. And we can see there have been some pretty positive results as a consequence of its use. Not always, and you know, there's a few people, one in this room who I can think of, who perhaps haven't got the outcomes that they might have hoped for. But there's also a heck of a lot of others who have. And I'm not suggesting, for instance, that the DDA standards oughtn't to be policed and enforced. Of course they should be. But it is the model of discrimination law for other grounds of discrimination that we have across Australia. And I think it's an underutilised tool. I don't think we use it enough. And when you think about the impacts that it's had, I think it's got greater capacity. But I tend to agree with Craig that when you were commenting a couple of weeks ago, I think on the ABC, on Sydney ABC in the mornings, that you know, all of us know what it's like to go out into the world. We walk out our front doors, and Elizabeth Hastings used to say we swim in a sea of discrimination. She was the first Disability Discrimination Commissioner. And what was your phrase a couple of weeks ago?
I called it the pervasive banality of discrimination.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. And that's what my little ticket barrier incident was. You know, a small issue in the scheme of things, but they build up and up and up. And it's really tough to fight that. So I get that it's hard, but we do have to keep pushing for inclusion. It's really important.
Thanks for that. Stuart.
Graham, I was wondering if you could make a few suggestions as to how we could sharpen the teeth of the DDA, especially in regard to employment.
Well, you know, I think the DDA is the wrong tool for employment, because you can only use it when the employment relationship is damaged, usually fatally damaged. Because an employment relationship is a relationship of trust between an employer and an employee. And if the employee has lost so much trust that they feel that they have to lodge a complaint to an independent body, the relationship's probably terminally damaged, and the best thing is for the relationship to end and for the person, you know, to work somewhere else. So I'm not sure there's a lot you can do which will help with employment. I think we've got to change attitudes and approaches to getting people into jobs, and the more numbers we get, the more effective we'll be. In terms of other things in the Act, I would give the Commissioner the right to lodge complaints on behalf of people or groups of people. I think that'd be a very powerful weapon, so the Commissioner could initiate complaints. I lobbied really hard and almost got it over the line, but the NDIS was going so quickly, couldn't quite convince the key people that people could subrogate their rights to the NDIS, so that the NDIS could go to a transport provider and say, hey, I've got 1,000 clients with disabilities who live in this the area of this railway station or bus station. Now, would you like to make that accessible, or shall we start legal action? And to give the agency that stick to beat up broader areas of government and the private sector with, I think would have been a very powerful tool, but I couldn't get that one across the line. And I'd like to give the Commission the power to what's called co-regulate. In other words, get an industry code and effectively turn it into a DDA standard. Because the problem with DDA standards is they take so long to develop that, and you use so much energy and resources in doing that, that you have to sort of question. I mean, I don't think the education standard's having much impact. I think transport and buildings are, but I think education, a set of principles at a high level, it's not getting down there to the classroom and the school playground.
I'm going to take the three more questions that I've got, and then perhaps if you're around after, people can approach you and have a chat.
Yeah,
so
I'll have that glass of wine that I put off having when all of you had the chance to go out and have one.
Feel free.
Yeah.
Make it lively, your interview.
Yeah.
Fiona.
G'day, Fiona.
For another amazing speech. In my personal experience, I have experienced a greater prejudice within disability services than I have outside in the big wide world. Do you think that is true across the board?
Thanks for that question, Fiona. I'm always, when Fiona asks me a question, I sort of feel my age, because I worked with Fiona's dad when I worked at the Department of Consumer Affairs, and when you see Fiona making the powerful contribution that she has over the years to the disability sector, I sort of think, oh, it's time for me to move on, really. But anyway, having said that, look, yeah, we've got problems in the disability sector that we need to sort out. We don't have enough resources and energy and capacity to have fights within the disability sector, and we can't expect the outside world not to discriminate against us and limit us if the sector does it itself. So there are times when I have sort of said to key leaders in the sector, you know, quietly, I don't really say this sort of thing publicly about a particular organisation. You really need to go and have a good hard look at yourself, because you need to think about what your key focus is, and if it's having a fight with another disability organisation or limiting opportunities for people with disabilities, then you're really in the wrong game. You know, that's not what it's about. So I think disability organisations should be the exemplars in employment of people with disabilities, for instance. I've just become president of an organisation, and we're advertising for a new chief executive. And I am determined that we will find a person with the disability that the organisation represents in that role. We have to. If we can't employ people with disabilities, how can we go out and say to other people that they should? So yeah, you cannot be what you cannot see.
Here. Who can imagine infighting in the disability community, by the way?
Yeah.
Sam.
Hi, Graham. Sam Connor. I won't ask the tricky question about BSWAT and NDS, because that will take up too much time.
Sorry, about what?
BSWAT and National Disability Services.
Oh, I'll just adopt the position that Craig set out at the AGM.
That's it. So I'll ignore that one.
Easy.
But I wanted to ask about the employment rate of people with disability in the National Disability Insurance Scheme. The report's just come out to say that they have 10% of people with disability, and I'm aware that for some states their bilateral agreement means that only public servants can be employed under their agreements, and I know that you're a passionate advocate around employment of people with disability in the public service, and know that it's incredibly low. I'm just wondering, there's more people who have lived experience, which is the term that they're using for family members of people with disability, but I'm wondering what your position is on the 10% and whether it's enough, and also whether we need more people at the helm of the organisation.
Well, 10% is a good start. That's my position. It's a good start, but it's not there. I mean, when they're at 10%, as is the Department of Health, you know, across the Commonwealth Public Service it's 2.9. So the NDIA are way out in front, aren't they? But so they should be. And I and a number of others lobbied really hard during the establishment of the NDIA to make it a key focus. And initially we weren't winning that argument, but we managed to turn it around. I think the NDIA should do everything in its capacity to ensure the employment of people with disabilities. It shouldn't just do it in terms of employment, but it should, in all of its procurement, it should say, if you want contracts with us, you have to employ 10% of people with disabilities, or whatever the figure is. And it should not buy products from organisations that don't do that. And it should only buy products which are accessible. And the broader government should do that. Commonwealth and state government should do it. I'm at the moment talking with the New South Wales government about putting that in their inclusion plan. Because, you know, that's the only way we're going to turn this sort of thing around.
I have to, I will get to the last question, but some of the large consultancy firms that make so much money off us, reviewing employment, reviewing the NDIS, do they step up? Should they?
Well, certainly they should. No doubt about that. And I tell them that every time I'm trying to get a job with them as a consultant.
Does it work?
Yeah, it does, yes, in some respects. Look, I haven't seen any figures on that, so it's hard for me to answer. My sense is that it's not good enough yet, and that there aren't enough people with disabilities in those sorts of roles. But they're another example of where it needs to occur.
Bonnie, I think you had your hand up earlier. Yep. You have a microphone.
Sorry, Graham, Bonnie here. I just wanted to ask, in terms of negative perceptions on the DSP and the changes that are being made to the DSP to roll out to the community, as well as the clash with the NDIS, I was just wondering what you think of that and what changes can be made in terms of the DSP argument.
Well, you know, as I've said in a number of speeches over the last few months, this government has a welfare plan. We know about that. Their plan is to get more people off welfare, and to reduce the value of the support which other people get by moving people off the DSP and onto the New Start allowance. People particularly with levels of mental illness, but they haven't got a jobs plan, so there's not a plan to move people off welfare. But you know, I agree with Craig. I think we're the lifters in this area. We're all, those of us who have been able to find the opportunities are out there lifting. I mean, people with disabilities. We're out there, you know, whether we're lifting in the workforce or lifting in our community activities or lifting in some other way. And I'm yet to meet, in all my time in the disability sector, I'm yet to meet someone who wants to be on the DSP. You know, who'd want to live on less than $20,000 a year. So people are there because there's no alternatives. And so in that sense, there's no real plan. And while there isn't a plan, you know, the 45% of us in or near poverty is going to remain. And that's why, you know, we need politicians to step up and take some real leadership on these sorts of issues. In terms of employment, we need people to break the mould about getting people into jobs. And I actually have been saying that I think what we should do is we should say to major employers, all right, you reckon you can employ people with disabilities, you're willing to take it on, and I'm talking about where the CEO steps up and says, yes, I'm ready to do this, like Gail Kelly did and previous CEOs in Westpac. What a loss Gail Kelly's retirement is to the diversity and disability sector. But I think we should say to them, okay, here's a bucket of money, here's your KPIs, just go away and do it. And in 12 months come back to us and report. Because what we're doing now is not working. So I think government needs to get out of the way and let the sector, or the chunks of the sector that put their hand up, go away and do it.
I think Just Do It has just become a hashtag on Twitter, or it should.
Yeah, it should.
Members, please thank Graham Innes. Graham, thanks for being so open with us, and we hope that you'll stay and meet with members. We've got a small gift, and it's kind of liquid shaped, I think,
wow.
to say thanks. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
I'll hand that to you. I'm just passing it to you, Graham.
Thanks very much.
Cheers, no worries. Before we wrap up for this evening, we've got some other presentations that we want to make to acknowledge people. We want to, especially I want to acknowledge all of our retiring board members by name. So Fiona, Christy, Irene, Susie, Nigel, and Alex, who was co-opted onto the board. I'd like to have some presentations to our volunteers. Firstly to Susan Baxter. Susan attends PWDA 2 days a week as our communications volunteer. So well done. Where's Susan?